Strength and resilience. We pause to celebrate the 160th anniversary of Juneteenth. In June of 1865, enslaved Africans in Texas became the last to know they were free. We'll explore what that freedom really meant and how the formerly enslaved built community against all odds. Imagine leaving the plantations, searching for your children. A genealogy expert joins us to discuss today's search for ancestors. And sugar or not, we'll try to settle the great grits debate as we explore food as cultural impact and resistance. Next on Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel on 9 PBS. Welcome back to Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel on 9 PBS. Clarity, understanding, and empathy. Common values for those on the front lines charting a bold way forward for African Americans in St. Louis. Stay tuned as we talk to these change makers, visionaries, and overcomers. I'll ask the questions you want to hear and get the clarity we all need about the issues we face. That's next on Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel on 9 PBS.
Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel is supported in part by Midwest Bank Center, Orvin and Latrice Kimbrough, the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation, and the St. Louis Development Corporation.
Thank you all for coming. Applause, applause, applause. How exciting.
Yes.
How exciting. And as mentioned, this is being recorded. So I would love for the whatever number there is in the audience that I cannot necessarily see, I'd like you to sound like it's 3 times that number. So we'll try that one more time. We are live here at the Missouri History Museum in Forest Park in St. Louis, Missouri. Wow! Y'all gonna make me cry this makeup off. Well, thank you so much. And first, thank you to Amy Shaw and Aja Williams. Things really happen, things really go well when you have 2 talented, gifted women at the helm. Let me just say that. I believe I'm right. And as I'm coming up on almost 2 years now at 9 PBS, I wanted to thank them publicly for bringing me into the fold. A thank you, too, to the Missouri History Museum, offering this beautiful building and space, this historic building and space. Jody is the only person, and I've told him this, he's the only person who I stop in my tracks when his commercials come on, because I want to hear exactly what he is about to tell me. I know it is important. I know it is informative. Jody, thank you so much. And if you peeped his shoes, those who will see this podcast later, you will not see his shoes. So I will try to Instagram a photo of the shoes that he was wearing he said just for me, because we're both into shoes. As mentioned, we are taping the podcast before an audience, but the same requests apply. Please become a subscriber. Please share this podcast, because we love a good viral moment and we've been blessed to have a few. And please like it as well. And we would love to read your comments, whether they are from London or Savannah, Georgia. Yes, I'm bragging. Savannah, Georgia, you know who you are. Keep weighing in. Tonight, we're going to focus on 3 aspects of life for the formerly enslaved, starting with the immediate aftermath, and then how more and more African Americans are doing the research to determine their ancestry beyond slavery. We will hear from some people who attended the recent reopening of the old courthouse in downtown St. Louis, the site of hundreds of freedom suits, most notably the suits filed by Dred and Harriet Scott for their freedom. We will conclude our conversation with a delicious talk about food. Food as sustenance, food as cultural impact, and food as resistance by and for those who came out of slavery. We're also going to play for you a previous podcast about the Great Migration and what we learned in that podcast, the fact that everybody who came to St. Louis, which was one of the stops on the first wave of the Great Migration, was not coming to escape the violence of the South, professionals were coming to St. Louis as well, and you're going to learn about some of them. She's already seated, and if any of you watch my podcast, how many of you do by a round of applause? If any of you are lying, I'm okay with that. You will recognize her because we have this incredible partnership and relationship with the Missouri Historical Society. Cicely Hunter is the public historian for the African American History Initiative right here at the Missouri Historical Society. And I jokingly said to her, welcome, but I'm in your house.
I consider it our house, you know? We're all welcome.
Well, thank you for having us in your house.
Yes, ma'am.
Let us start with the what and the why of Juneteenth. We know that the Emancipation Proclamation had been issued, but there were some slaves in Texas who did not know.
Correct. Yes, so Juneteenth historically represents June 19th, 1865, which is known as the day when enslaved people in Galveston, Texas received notice from Union Army Major General Gordon Granger and Union troops that enslaved people were considered to no longer be under the oppressive system of slavery, but were in fact free people.
And you actually have the language of the Emancipation Proclamation. People will see the invitation, the graphic of this event tonight. The words are in the background, but read some of that for us, Cicely.
Yes. So this is considered to be the General Order number 3. So there's debates among historians about, well, it was read here and there. We won't get off into that too much. But the words that were read on that particular day is the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freed are advised to remain in their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere.
Three things jumped out to y'all. Yeah. Did they not? Absolute equality.
Yes.
We are still struggling for absolute equality. And the idleness and to stay in your homes. First of all, the homes we now know, many of us know, have seen slave cabins. Those are the homes we're talking about, are we not?
Yes.
And the idleness part, which it just seemed like a trick from the beginning.
Yes.
And so, Cicely, what was established then were what were called contraband camps.
So the contraband camps go back to during the time of the Civil War. So we're going to now talk a little bit about St. Louis in Missouri. We're going to talk about a little bit about across the river in Illinois. And this is the place, Missouri, in which is considered to be a border state. So there were contraband camps. And so these border states, as well as southern territories as well, would have had these contraband camps that are essentially considered to be refuge for formerly enslaved people who might have self-emancipated, for example. And so one of these, the first one that we have here, was considered to be the Missouri Hotel, which was located on Main and Morgan Streets. There was a contraband camp by General Samuel Curtis. He believed that he wanted to set up one, and it was called Camp Ethiopia. And then later there's Benton Barracks. And so essentially these spaces served as a place that created the foundation of the Black community as we know it, right? And so even though there were, of course, some hiccups and some things that weren't necessarily
because they weren't totally safe, and
correct.
They weren't right.
Yeah, they weren't totally safe because there could have been opportunities for formerly enslaved people to be captured, right? So these things did, of course, exist. But essentially, it helped to reunify families, to reestablish Black churches, to build hospitals, for example, and served as educational centers, as well as creating shelters and even allowing for there to be employment, right? So overall, what we're seeing happening is a unification of becoming an American through our identity. in the sense of these contraband camps serving in this particular way.
And I want us to continue to envision that 5 seconds earlier, you are a slave on a plantation. Just earlier in your life, and then suddenly you are free. But you are told you cannot be idle. And you are told that you can work for wages, but that doesn't really necessarily occur. As we flash forward to sharecropping, there's still a battle to be paid fairly. But then there is a push to become engaged in civil society. There is a push. Many men are elected to office. There is a push to establish businesses. And the Missouri Equal Rights League is founded in 1865. What was the goal of the Missouri Equal Rights League?
Yes. So essentially in October, a group of people get together and they're tasked with creating activist components. And so really thinking about that equality that you talked about, the Missouri Equal Rights League. So it served as an educational force. So that's what they were essentially tasked with, educating as well as really trying to make sure that people were able to vote. Is essentially it. Right. So education and voting are two. So you have people like Moses Dixon, for example, who is a co-founder of the Missouri Equal Rights League. And, you know, even before the war breaks out, he is galvanizing what is considered to be thousands of people. There's a task force of about 12 people who come together, and they are creating a secret society. So he's one individual through the Missouri Equal Rights League who's leading the charge. Then you have James Milton Turner as well, who is traveling throughout Missouri. And really, he's an excellent orator, and he's speaking about education. He's speaking about voting and the importance of it.
And they then write an address to the Friends of the Equal Rights. And this appears in newspapers. Again, we're still in 1865 here. Yes. So these are very vocal people about what they want to accomplish and how they want to be received and perceived.
Absolutely. And so when we think about activism, newspapers becomes a way in which they're leveraging their ways of communication. So we're not in the texting era. We're not we're not in the social media era, but now folks are leading the charge by remaining in communication, by disseminating this information through newspapers. And of course, we know that there are other folks as well who are traveling through railways and things of that nature who are transmitting this information. And so the newspapers becomes a source of that. And we can even think about how that continues, right? Even after 1865. There are newspapers that we know of, the Argus, for example, in 1912 or so, that was founded, the St. Louis American in 1928. So these are things that continue. And the St. Louis American even lives on today.
Absolutely. And I, as by way of pitching, shameless plug, Dr. Donald M. Suggs, who is the now publisher of the St. Louis American, the previous podcast, there were 300 Black newspapers at one time in this country, and each of them had the goal of a more informed Black electorate, a more active Black society. And the St. Louis American is one of those. And on that podcast, you will be fascinated by what he has to say of what he thinks it was then and what he thinks of the Black press today. So 9pbs.org. Let me just say that. As you mentioned, education is key. Education is key. Schools were beginning to be founded.
Yes. So you have schools in 1866. I believe there was about 3 that began, but there were up to 12 that would actually come about. And so they're titled Colored School Number, and then whatever the number 1, 2, 3 through 12. The one that I'll talk a little bit about was actually Ellardsville Colored School Number 8. And so this was located in Ellardsville, which became the Ville. Right? Right?
We're learning.
Okay,
we're learning.
I love it. So once it becomes Colored School Number 8, then it goes to Simmons. And so you have people like Julia Davis, who was really influential in many children's lives, and she has a library named after her, but she really sewed into the young people. And then you have people like General Roscoe Robinson Jr., who becomes the first African-American general and is doing some incredible things. So we got to really think about the way that Black people here in St. Louis are really doing incredible things. And it's just right here in the Ville neighborhood and amongst other communities as well.
And clearly, we just had an election in St. Louis for several positions, including for the mayor, 25% voter turnout, which is dismal by any account. When we talk about the Emancipation Proclamation and Juneteenth and the immediate thereafter efforts to be included in society, the people say this all the time. People died for my right to vote. People died for my right to vote. And so we're looking at a time where people are absolutely risking their lives and their livelihoods to vote.
Yes. And so those figures that I've mentioned, Moses Dixon and James Milton Turner, among the others that were a part of the executive board, and those who were not, who were just leading the charge for the Missouri Equal Rights League, they wanted to make sure that voting was possible, though it came by the 15th Amendment. So it would happen later, but still, nevertheless, just because it didn't necessarily happen right away doesn't mean that they didn't have as much of an impact. They certainly did in their communities here in Missouri and throughout St. Louis as well.
I think that anybody in the audience looking at you would say, boy, she's awfully young to be a historian.
Really? Look, oh my God.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Why are you a historian?
Oh, that's a great question.
I'm full of them.
You are. Well, Carol, that was not an easy one. Well, so I think honestly, it dates back to my time in high school where I felt like I didn't learn a lot of Black history. And so just to be fair, I am actually from Wisconsin. I am not from St. Louis. So don't drag me too much, okay? I've been here for 10 years and I'll be going on 11 years here pretty soon. But I think that I didn't learn a lot. And I took a class at Marquette and I'm a TRIO student, student support services all the way. And I was even a McNair scholar. And when I was in the classroom, I was like, whoa, I don't know about Marcus Garvey, right? I don't know about all these individuals who had such an impact. And from there, I started to do research and I was just like, whoa, it was mind boggling. And to take that here to St. Louis and study at American Studies at St. Louis University. And I have not yet complete my doctoral degree.
You brought it up before I did.
I did. But the work continues, and it continues with me being here in spaces like this, sharing this history, that truly the Missouri Historical Society is all about sharing the stories of the lived experiences here. So whether you're from here or you're not even from here, but you're just here, we will love to come and share this story with you because it is so important to the legacy of our young people and to the direction of our society and our country.
Well, I want to encourage our listeners and our viewers to go back and look and listen at our history series. 95% of the stories about notable Black St. Louisans and moments that I had never heard of. And I am also not from here, but I have lived here for over 30 years now. It was so edifying to talk to you. And it being edifying, I think, makes it easier to elevate our thinking about who we are as a region. And clearly, Cicely, the things that you instructed us through that series of interviews tells us that we stand on the shoulders of creative, hardworking men and women who made a way against all odds. So I want to thank you for doing the great work. Every time I'm with her, I push her. I ask her about the PhD, how is it going? Because I want to call her Dr. Cicely Hunter, and you want me to call you Dr. Cicely Hunter. And so we think of Juneteenth as a celebration, clearly, but it is about resilience. It is about resilience. And I know that for you, that has a great deal of meaning as well.
Yes. So it's just been an incredible couple of weeks, and not entirely in a good way, but because of that tornado, right?
You and I were both in.
We were.
So and she may not say it, I will for you, that her twins were in, and they are how old?
They just turned one as of Friday. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was in the Urban League office on Kings Highway. The building was hit by the tornado. Cicely's twins were in their daycare. The daycare building was hit by the tornado. So we both sit here having been affected. And so this message of resilience you're tying what we see in Juneteenth historically to what we're seeing today.
Absolutely. So we've witnessed in so many ways the strength and resilience of our own community. Not only was my children's daycare hit, but the overall area where we stay off of Union and Delmar was hit. And if you all have seen the pictures, it's truly been hard, to say the least. And so we've seen resilience as rapid mobilization and resources being shared just in a plethora of way. And my voice is shaking. I'm so sorry, you all.
No, don't apologize. No.
But just to think about the grassroots organizing and the activism that came by local people. So we talk about Moses Dixon. We talk about James Milton Turner. Jody talked a little bit about Charlton Tandy earlier. These are people just like us who walk every single day the grounds of St. Louis, right? Mm-hmm, these are the stories.
These are the people. We are the people.
We are the people, yes. And so we are living history, and it's up to us to decide what that future looks like, right? It's up to us for my little ones, my twins, it's up for us to help prepare for them. And so if we don't do it, who will?
Right.
And so I want us to think about, those who were enslaved, who labored. Think about the free people who labored and who lived here, who resisted, who even rested, because it's not always about working hard. Sometimes it's about actually taking time for yourself to rest, right? Some of us are still processing what transpired. Some of us haven't quite wrapped our minds around it, right? And so thinking about our minds, our bodies, our spirits, we all are repairing in this moment, and we are repairing as a collective. And so that's just a few words that I wanted to leave you with, and just to think about how those historical moments really do resonate with our today, because we are living and breathing that history from back then.
Dr. Cicely Hunter, I'm going to say it. I'm just going to start saying it. Cicely is the public historian for the African American History Initiative here at the Missouri Historical Society, the Missouri History Museum. It is always a joy to talk to you and spend time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol.
Now you stay right there. As I mentioned, when the old courthouse reopened, our producer, Leah Gullett, went out and talked to some of the people who were attending that historic event after the old courthouse was closed for the multi-million-dollar renovations. If you have not been, you need to go. And she went out, took our 9 PBS camera, and asked people, what does Juneteenth mean to you? Take a look.
It's just an incredible honor and no coincidence that the Dred and Harriet Scott Gallery is opening at the grand reopening of the old courthouse today. And therefore, I truly wish that they were here to see how they're being honored, because what Dred and Harriet did was not just for them, but for all African Americans. So this location actually represents their history as well, and Juneteenth will be very special this year.
This building is not only important to our country's, our city's history, but our country's history. And for this anniversary, this building is important to that. I mean, the Dred and Harriet Scott case really was the spark that lit the Civil War's beginning.
What Juneteenth means to me this year is another opportunity to raise awareness for people in the community of us coming together as Afro-American people as a culture, and basically enriching our culture even more for the young men and women who are coming after us. And with the 160th, anniversary, we get to look back on all the milestones that have brought us to this tremendous, great opportunity to be better, and basically just to build upon that.
The Civil War was fought over slavery, but it wasn't until Juneteenth when the message of freedom reached all enslaved people and we could truly celebrate freedom. And I think it's so momentous now to see how far we've come in 160 years, but also how much farther we have to go.
I think for me, one of the big things is that history ripples out, and that it kind of has this extensive movement across time. it's really easy to think about justice as a one-off event of we did this thing, it was fixed, and now we can move on. But the way that history operates is it continues moving throughout our own stories, throughout this journey to justice that they talk about here. And so I think the anniversary is really important to remind us that those efforts for justice are still going, but we're also still having to learn about that history, that there are a lot of efforts to undo, to rewrite, to change how we learn and know that history. And so it's really imperative that we make a real concerted effort to focus and to study diligently to pursue that justice and that important work.
On June 19th, 1865, you have this period of freedom. You have a place in where formerly enslaved Africans are experiencing their first taste of freedom. But you also have a period of where that freedom is snatched. And what we need to take from Juneteenth is a moment of reckoning, a moment of reverence, but then a recommitment to the struggle that we're still fighting. And just like our ancestors had to toil on through Reconstruction and Jim Crow, we're still fighting that struggle. And so I take Juneteenth as a time to reflect, to celebrate, but then also to recommit to the struggle.
Thank you very much. Well, one thing that many of the formerly enslaved did immediately after the Emancipation Proclamation and after Juneteenth was try to reunite with family, try to find children and spouses that were sold away. And those efforts were rarely successful. The binds that were broken in so many ways, the connection to Africa, the motherland, as so many people call it, were torn away. And with so many traditions lost, I will never forget an assignment that our 29-year-old got when he was in elementary school. The assignment was to do a family tree, and the students were to add their ancestry. I emailed the teacher because I was a little bit outspoken. I explained to her that her Black students would likely only be able to say Africa because, well, slavery and all. And she never responded. I too remain stunned by the fact that she never responded. But today there is a growing focus, and it has been for years really, on figuring out where we came from, and at least from an ancestry standpoint, which African countries we may belong to. More African Americans or descendants of the enslaved are trying to trace their roots. And that has changed with companies, of course, like Ancestry.com, intentional work of more and more family genealogists, and I'm going to introduce one to you right now. And let's talk about how African Americans can determine who they are beyond slavery. This is Linda Sims, president of the St. Louis African American History and Genealogy Society. Linda, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Linda brought a fan club. Why did you want to explore your family's ancestry in the first place? And it started very young, I understand.
Yes, I was in high school when I began my research and searching for my family ancestors. I was that one that while my siblings would be outside playing, I would be in-house reading a book or sitting at my great aunt's feet asking questions about their mom and dad from Mississippi. I'm looking at pictures, so I want to know who these people are. And also, I began my research in high school, so everyone seeing roots wanted to know, well, what's in my heritage? So that got me started.
And how did you actually start? Was it actually with photos? Were you looking at the photos and then turning around and asking your elders the question?
It was a combination of both. I'm a picture hoarder, so I love pictures. I love old pictures. I'm a collector of obituaries. I want to know who these people are. And so asking questions to my mother, and my mother was one that was the matriarch of our family. So she shared information, so that piqued my curiosity even more.
And did you find roadblocks that you could tell us if we were to start a search today that will be common?
Initially, before Ancestry, when you would have to go to the library and do the crank and reel, going through the census records. But even before you get to that point, you got to know who your parents are, from yourself and go backwards. So yourself, your parents, your grandparents, and work that way. You can't start in the middle. You got to start from the beginning. The beginning is with you.
And I believe that you've said that you need a paper trail first before. You can't jump in with DNA.
No. DNA should validate your paper trail. So you have to have done the work to establish who your family are, so that when you see all these DNA matches, you see your ethnicity estimates, it makes sense to you. It should validate what you've already researched.
And one of the clear reasons, obvious reasons we're having this conversation is we are celebrating this federal holiday as it is now, Juneteenth. But how many of us can say, oh, my great, 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 great was there in 1865. I know I have family that were in Galveston. Not many of us can even say that. So we're celebrating something that most of us today are disconnected from.
Right. And that's just Galveston. But think about Mississippi. You think about Georgia, Alabama, all of the states where we are represented in those states should all want to know where we came from. We all came over here because of an ancestor, came across the transatlantic slave trade. And so we started from the Carolinas, the Virginia, so now migrating through slavery down into your southern states, and some stayed, north, but we got here somewhere. So it's important for us to trace our history.
Many of us know about the 23andMe data breach. You are or are not concerned about that?
I am in 4 databases. I'm in 23andMe, Ancestry, MyHeritage, and Family Tree DNA. So yes, there was a data breach with 23andMe. I'm not overly concerned with that. You do have the option when you take a DNA test to ask them not to store your data. But I'm not overly concerned about that right now.
And tell me the story, a story of what you have discovered in your family. And I want to be full disclosure. And I'm looking at your face, and all I can see is your daughter. Her daughter is our producer here, Leah Gullett. And I'm so happy to say that Leah and I, in less than a year of this podcast, were nominated for an Emmy.
Yes.
And so congratulations. This is last year. Yeah, that was last year, and so we have re-entered. So maybe we'll be nominated a second time. That would be a blessing. Yes. Already is a blessing. But you are my producer's daughter and mother rather. I'm sorry, she's your daughter. Let me get it right. But the stories that you have found about your own ancestry through your research, which we describe as part detective, part hard-headedness, and part creative.
Resilience, persistence, dedication is not for the faint at heart and is not for the weak. So with my research, have been able to trace, I'm a 5th generation from my enslaved ancestors. My research has gone back to South Carolina. I'm currently writing a book on my paternal line. Some of the discoveries that I have found is in an 1836 will of my Hobson ancestors, seeing my 2nd great-grandfather and his mother and siblings on an inventory. Amongst the cattle and the housewares, and they were treated as slave property, chattel property. And so seeing them in those documents is heartbreaking. But at the same time, when they say you can't get beyond the 1870 brick wall, yes, you can. You can get beyond that. You have to be willing to look. Where are the records that will help get you there? You can breach that 1870 wall. Another thing, too, is knowing that my family had the Bugs Color School. So when we were able to, after slavery, to go to school, my older cousins, were school teachers, and they established the Bugs Color School. And it's established, it's documented, and so that'll also be in my book. The records were very detailed and well kept by my family.
And you, one more quick story. You did help someone in St. Louis determine that they are, I guess I could say, royalty.
So we have a member in our society that has an ancestor in 1820 was brought over here during the slave trade. And in 1820 was able to go back to Liberia and help establish Liberia.
That's amazing.
Amazing, yes.
And she mentioned that she's a picture hoarder.
Yes, I am.
But you also are a document hoarder, and
Yes.
there are documents are online. You say I'm being given the rap, but I have like 19 more questions for you. This is so fascinating. But you have a document that says what?
Yes, so my husband's family, in addition to tracing my own, I do trace his as well. My husband's family on his paternal line resided in Washington, D.C. They were brought to New Iberia, Louisiana, and stayed on Avery Island, which now you can't even go back there. It's a tourist area now. They were brought by the McElhennys. The McElhennys are the makers of the Tabasco sauce. So their family worked on the pepper farm. Yes. And there we have a picture of his second great-grandfather that was brought here, him and his second great-grandmother, Kitty, and their picture is on the wall at the Tabasco Museum.
You know what I think that given what we have learned about Uncle Nearest teaching Jack Daniels how to make whiskey, that maybe there is someone who taught them how to make Tabasco.
Yeah.
There's murmuring in the room. They're murmuring in the room.
And I also want to add to that, with my husband's third great-grandparents, which is his second great-grandfather, Nathan Sims, you want your ancestor that was enslaved to have died after those records became available, because why? There's a death certificate. You want them to have passed away once those death certificates were mandatory. Had his death certificate, his parents were listed on his death certificate, legible, was able to find them. They were brought to Louisiana. They stayed in D.C. When the Civil War kicked off, those slaves were freed first. I have the manumission papers of his third great-grandparents.
And the manumission papers are what?
Freedom, giving them their freedom.
Come on.
Yes.
Now, you know I wasn't the only one who wanted to say, what is manumission? You know y'all wanted to know. You have the freedom papers.
Yes.
That is fascinating. How can people learn more, learn how to do what you have been doing since you were in high school with the society? Can they get involved with the organization?
I would highly encourage you all to come visit us the third Saturday of each month right here at the Missouri History Museum in the AT&T room. We help beginners, intermediate, and more seasoned researchers trace their history. So we help them, and I saw on this video where Alicia Smith, we worked with the Jesuits for St. Louis University for those slaves. I've worked with Lynn Jackson, with Dred Scott, that was presented at the Roots Tech Conference last year. So we do help other people as well as each other.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for all the work you have done for your own family and for others. Linda Sims is the president of the St. Louis African American History and Genealogy Society. Write it down and look them up. Linda, thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
So now let's take a look back at a podcast interview that I did with Dr. Priscilla Dowden White. She is a history professor at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. She told me that everyone who came here during the Great Migration was not escaping the violence of the South. Professor Dowden White said that many professionals came here to St. Louis as well for very specific reasons. This is about the Great Migration.
I'm thinking about, for example, John T. Clark, who was the executive secretary of the St. Louis Urban League from 1926 to 1948. And he was born in Louisville, Kentucky. Among other places, when he started his Urban League career, he fathered the Pittsburgh League and he was there until 1918. He worked and had a leadership role in the Harlem, New York office. And so when he migrated to St. Louis, he migrated from Pittsburgh.
Oh.
He was in New York. He was Louisville, and then he had
it was the work that was moving him.
It was the work that was moving him. And then you have some of the teachers who come during that time, and her last name escapes me right now, Dr. Ruth. If you look on my notes, you might see. See.
I've got her book and I've got her notes.
I think I wrote her name down, but she became the principal.
Harris.
Yes, Ruth Harris, Dr. Ruth Harris.
I don't even have my glasses on and I could read that.
And my writing, my
no,
little
you have
scribble,
beautiful handwriting.
my scribble there.
So she too?
She came during that period. And there were a lot of African-American professional class. And something else to consider about John T. Clark's migration to St. Louis. He was familiar with St. Louis before he arrived, but it was that bond issue in 1922, that 80-something million, I think it was like $87 million bond issue, where $1.2 million of that bond issue was earmarked for the new Negro Hospital, which became, of course, Homer G. Phillips. And he said that was one of the major things that made him say, okay, I'll go to St. Louis and accept this job, because what this represents, on the one hand, is a voting population, first of all, a segregated city, yes, but a voting population that is willing to put more money into segregated institutions, transmuting segregation into power,
furthering professional
the manipulation
development,
of public culture. And so he's looking at this as an opportunity, not only for himself as the new executive secretary of the Urban League, but he's looking at it as an opportunity for community organizing and African American community advancement.
And you can go back and watch the entire episode with Dr. Priscilla Dowden-White. You can go back and watch that entire episode at our YouTube page or anywhere you listen to your podcast, 9pbs.org as well. We are continuing our conversation here live at the Missouri History Museum. By the time most of you will see this, we have taped it before a live studio audience. Yes. You would think that I paid them. I would if I could, y'all. I would if I could. But thank you so much again to the Missouri History Museum on this incredible partnership that we are continuing to grow. So many celebrations have food as either a focal point, of course, Thanksgiving turkey, or the backdrop like a graduation or engagement party. I wanted to end the show with a discussion about food. Actually, it was the first thing I thought of was, let's talk about food. We must talk about food. Food that the formerly enslaved created as sustenance, tradition, identity, and resistance. And many of those creations we still eat today. And indeed, therefore, I believe, represent resilience and strength. So how did the formerly enslaved create their own food culture with so little and the odds stacked against them in every single manner? My next guest is Dr. Tandra Taylor. She is assistant professor of history at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville, Illinois. Yes. She is also the interim director. Are you still interim?
Yes.
Interim director. I'm just looking for promotion Want to be
Me
sure?
too.
Me too. The interim director of the Institute for Community Justice and Racial Equity, and she is also a food historian. And I have to tell you, we were on a Zoom call. You were at home. I was in Breadco, Panera. Did we not talk for 2 hours?
It felt like the time flew by, but it really was about 2 hours.
I paid for the upgrade on Zoom, so we talked for 2 hours. It was so interesting. I had to shut it down because you had something to do. I had something to do. This is such a rich conversation, and I'm so happy to end our show on this way. Your research into food has focused on what exactly?
Sure. So my research began initially on Black women, their identities, but the ways in which I was studying late 19th century, early 20th century Black women, it's inextricably linked to food because their work is inextricably linked to food, whether as agricultural experts actually like in the field, or doing domestic tasks like cooking, being a maid, if you will.
And while still enslaved, many Africans were allowed to have gardens and were supplementing the rations that they received of cornmeal and pork. Generally, that's what they would get. And they also were foraging and hunting.
Absolutely. So as a part of the provisions laid out for enslaved individuals and families, according to the slave codes, they were to have been provided a peck of meal. So we're talking cornmeal and, so many ounces or pounds of salt pork. And if you think about it, you can only do so much with salt pork and meal. So enslaved individuals were very industrious, very resourceful, experts at hunting wild game and fowl, but also their kitchen gardens provided a good deal of good supplementary foodstuffs that they would actually want, right? So we're talking cabbage, we're talking mustard greens, we're talking okra, an indigenous African plant, actually field peas, like what we would call black-eyed peas, legumes. So things to enhance these rations, to make it more palatable, desirable, even creative.
Do we see the diets change immediately once free, or does the so-called survival food remain for decades to come?
So we don't yet see an immediate change in the diets of the newly freed men and women because their lifestyles, for many, hasn't quite changed. We heard earlier about, the news that the enslaved people in Galveston, Texas received, right? And those instructions to stay in your place, to stay where you are, and go back and work for your former enslavers as now paid laborers. And so if you think about that, so now they're doing contract work as paid agricultural laborers, but the diet doesn't change. So you still need a pretty high calorie diet to sustain yourself while working from sun up to sundown. And those resources, though paid laborers, they're not exactly making realistic wages so they can go out and order, a Delmonico steak or something like that, or have that in their own homes. That's not happening. So we do see the diets change, though, more towards the end of the 19th century.
And so to set the scene a little bit, so here we are, we're newly freed. The majority of us have no money, no education, no land. The Reconstruction period, we do see the formerly enslaved begin to run for office and be elected. HBCUs are being founded. 1866, my alma mater, Lincoln University in Jefferson City, was founded by Civil War veterans. But Black women are facing, and this is a part of your research, are facing still few choices, being domestics, and not just, you're not a domestic and you go in the home and then you go home at 5. You're staying in that home.
Many are. Many domestics were just forced by circumstance to stay with employers, but to be sure, that was the least desirable option. Where women could opt to or afford to make it on their own, they would choose to do that. One of the things that we don't talk about nearly enough is kind of the work environment of a domestic. So there's very little private life because you're living in your employer's home. You're at the constant whim of your employer's needs from sunup to sundown. And often their sleep could even be interrupted if there was something that an employer needed right away, you know? And so there's very little personal space, personal time to develop outside of being a domestic worker. And so when you add in things like literacy, they had few opportunities to educate themselves to go on to be something else. So really, we're talking about a very closed industry that these women are fighting fiercely to escape.
And at the same time, you have found, research tells us that here are Black women who know more about the food. It's not just food to eat, it's food to heal.
Food to eat, food to heal, food as a pathway to entrepreneurship even. One of the people I think that come to mind now is Melinda Russell. Melinda Russell is the author of the first published African-American cookbook that was written by a woman. Melinda Russell is born in 1812 in Clinton, Tennessee, so this is Eastern Tennessee, but she's not an enslaved woman. She's born as a free woman. And she publishes her book in 1866. It's entitled A Domestic Cookbook, right? And so
by Mrs. Melinda Russell.
By Mrs. Melinda Russell. And she's very proud of that. And she even, she tells us a little bit of biographical information in the preface of that book. And she says, I was never a slave. This is the information on my mom. And then she closes with, I knew I had to write this book because the people that have had my food will most certainly buy it. So this is a cookbook that Russell publishes, and it boasts over 100 recipes for sweets. Now, Russell is by trade a pastry chef. We don't know much about her beyond she was born a free woman, she was widowed early, and she's a mom to a differently able son. He can't quite use one of his arms. And so she takes this knowledge of being able to bake well. She starts a pastry shop and she sells a book. In addition to those,
in 1866,
when most Black Americans cannot read. And she, in addition to those sweets, she has savory recipes. She also has recipes for household toiletries, like shampoo, cologne. You're having a toothache, she has something for that too.
And did she create something if your breast milk wasn't coming in?
Now, you're speaking my language.
Okay.
So for decades, historians believe that we didn't know about Melinda Russell's cookbook till very recently. And I mean recently, like the last 15 years or so. This is a recent discovery. Prior to that, we thought the 1881 publication of what we call the Abby Fisher cookbook, written by Mrs. Abby Fisher, was the first cookbook to be published by a Black woman. And Abby Fisher, she creates this recipe called infant pap. I had no idea what infant pap was, but it's a recipe for food preparation. For example, if a mother is nursing, maybe she falls ill, maybe her milk supply is low, but you can apparently feed your child this infant pap and keep them alive and well. Mrs. Fisher adds, after that recipe, I have birthed and reared 11 children, and they're all alive. So that was a badge of honor for Mrs. Fisher, in addition to her extraordinary triumph leaving Alabama, landing in San Francisco in 1881. That's where the book was published, San Francisco. Unlike Russell, Mrs. Fisher actually was an enslaved woman. And by the time she's 48 years old, I can't imagine doing this at 48. By the time she's 48, she launches a business from San Francisco. She takes her family with her. She shows
all 11?
Not all 11, but for sure we know that there were some children with her.
Because others are probably grown by
Some of them she's 48, so maybe, some have gone on to start their own families. But in the 1880 census, she shows up as a 48-year-old woman who describes her career as a cook. She's still identifying as a cook. She defines her race as mulatto. She's there with her husband, whose race is also mulatto. And his occupation is a manufacturer. And I'm assuming that he's working for his wife's business. So in 1881, an enslaved woman, 48, makes it out to San Francisco. A lot of, there was contestation around, did she really write this book, the authorship of the book? So while the authorship may have been in question, one of the things she inscribes as her credential in that book is she says, I have over 35 years of expertise, like developing my skills in cooking. So her credential, that was like, I don't know if you play cards, Carol, but that was like the big joker on the table. I do this, is what she's reminding us. And she was able to create a business that sustained herself and her family in 1881. Still don't know how she made it from Alabama.
Wow. Was that a spades move just now? Is that what you did?
That was Abby Fisher's spades move.
Oh, okay.
That was her big joker.
Don't take my black card.
We'll teach you.
Okay, thank you. Well, no, I'm too old now, I think. You have found, and I cannot wait to hear the answer to this, but you have found that there was, and perhaps still is, a tense relationship that we have with food, with our food. Explain that.
So this is, the relationship that we have is rooted in, as we're, how do I say this? We became an African American people. We didn't come here as African Americans. So this story of becoming an African American or Black American coincides with the Great Migration story. This is when, between 1910 and 1970, upwards of 6 million Black folks left the South for cities in the North, the West, the Middle West. And as a part of that, they're leaving kind of the past behind, this nasty kind of stain
dusty,
of slavery.
Yes,
and the nastiness of the scraps that we were given to survive. And so as a part of that, recreating that identity, we're becoming a new people. Some of us tried to eschew, pork and corn products, because that represented a time that was very, very painful for us. And so we see these different kind of shifts over time. So in one way, you have Southern migrants who are arriving to northern cities. We also have Black people who've always been free in the North.
Right.
And so you have what's called this class stratification that emerges. And so the Southern migrants, they want to create new identity for themselves where they don't stick out like a sore thumb, like the newcomer, like the backwards old person. And then the longstanding Black folks who've been in cities like New York, Chicago, St. Louis even, want to distinguish themselves. Oh, I'm not like them. I don't eat this.
This is where the Ralph Ellison story comes in,
gosh.
Which I love. The author of The Invisible Man, he reportedly is at a diner and is offered the special. And his reaction is a whole sociological, political joker on the table.
For sure.
I'm
it
learning.
was Ralph Ellison's big joker to remind us how significant food is.
And so what was the special and why? What was?
So Ralph Ellison's, just brilliant. So the protagonist in the novel is a newcomer in Harlem, in New York. And he wants to distance himself from his Southern past. There's an old man yam vendor who's a heckler, Mr. Wheatstraw, who's like,
I love a good yam
vendor.
vendor.
Oh my gosh.
He's
like, oh, you're fronting. You're a Southerner. I know you. You're a Southern boy. And he's like, no, I'm not. So he's trying to hide from this past. He gets to this diner, and this is him trying to assert himself as, I'm not a newcomer. I'm a long-standing New Yorker, okay? So, the server didn't think about it. Oh, would you like this special? And the protagonist asks, what's the special? The waiter responds, oh, it's pork chop, grits, 1 egg, a biscuit, and a cup of coffee. And so the protagonist is like sitting there, like dying, like hunger pangs, the whole thing. He wants the special, but he's trying to front. He's trying to recreate his identity.
I don't eat that stuff.
He said, no, I just want toast, coffee, and an orange juice. He wanted the special.
He wanted that pork chop, girl.
Without question.
Yeah. Which then therein lies the tension we have with our food. Our food, the struggle food represents our past. Let's talk specific foods, starting with grits, a part of the original rations. And then I want your historic insight on the Great Debate, which many of my colleagues were like, what is the debate? And I was like, you don't know? Y'all know, some of y'all know.
I hope no one brought tomatoes to throw at me.
Okay, but the debate, sugar or not. But there is
See?
Yes,
Carol,
I'm sorry, y'all hate me. Oh, who's the no on sugar and grits? Applause. Are there any yeses on sugar and grits? Wow. Okay.
Now, see, that doesn't surprise me. We're in the Middle West. Now, while all may not be Midwesterners, that doesn't surprise me.
So give me this historic part about your understanding of why this even became a thing. There wasn't always sugar in grits.
Sure. So I will say, I am a team butter, salt, and pepper on my grits person. Even though I also share a Midwestern identity with probably at least half of the folks clapping at sugar in the grits. I grew up in East St. Louis and
all right, 89.
Yes. And so the grits weren't really a staple in my house. Our breakfast grain of choice was rice, but that's another conversation.
Oh, girl. Me too, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize grits were like a real serious thing until I moved to the South in Spelman College. And I went to a restaurant and saw, it was like an old, what someone would call a fish and bread restaurant. And I saw on the menu fish and grits. I'm asking people, are they serious? So the grits were initially to be a savory dish, not sweet. In fact, if you want to be, technical, enslaved community didn't have access to tons of like sugar and sweets. And so it was always a savory. It became a sweet when we left the South and came to the North.
Okay.
We became a working class urban population. We need high calories, high energy. And as cookbook author, food practitioner, expert Edna Lewis would say, sugar and grits is not Southern food, or so she would say Southern food. This is hard times in Harlem. So when we start to see foods change, Edna Lewis is a Southerner. She's a purist. She believes that food should be eaten in season. She really loves to raise the profile of Southern food or Black culinary food by reminding us of the botanical and seasonal legacy of our food traditions.
The botanical and seasonal legacy of our African heritage.
Yes, that's it.
Yes. Origin story of cornbread and how the perception and meaning has changed.
Ooh, these are great.
Thank you.
It's almost like you do this.
It's almost like yes.
So I'll talk about one of my favorite sources as a food historian are travelers' diaries. They write everything. One of my favorite travelers' diaries is that which belonged to landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted. And one of the things he noted while traveling across the South was there was only one bread and one vegetable in the South. And the vegetable he was talking about was a sweet potato. But the bread, he didn't even list that. We know it's cornbread he's talking about because it is, again, it can be made with those rations. It can be made very inexpensively. But once it's done, it's also preserved for a little bit. You don't there's no refrigeration. This is something that can be consumed over time. It travels very well.
And sweet potatoes versus yams. The yam is the African root vegetable.
Yes.
But sweet potatoes are what Africans and formerly enslaved then
kind of refer to as a yam. Although it's interesting when we say yam, when we say sweet potato pie, for example, sweet potato, obviously, we'd say it's sweet potato pie, not a yam pie.
Right.
We'd say candied yams probably more often than sweet potatoes, but they are two.
I just realized that we do say candied yams. We don't say candied sweet potatoes.
They're two different foodstuffs. A yam is actually a native African plant, so a starchy food that can be used like alongside soups and stews as something to kind of what we call sop up with.
Come on with it,
So
girl.
we wouldn't use necessarily a starchy sweet potato, but we had cornbread to do the sopping of our kind of mess of greens, or stew, if you will, made of greens.
Sadly, I'm getting the rap sign in my ear, but I have pound cake. I have hibiscus.
Okay.
To ask you about hibiscus, we have a specialty drink here tonight that has it. Y'all didn't have it. I'm going to have it. Hibiscus in it. Hibiscus cultivated in Africa, but it's of course in many places, including China. But
let's talk about hibiscus.
Yes.
The kind of culinary tradition of the red drink.
Yes.
In Black food traditions, and how that relates to Juneteenth. Juneteenth, as it has become more popular because it is today a federal holiday, Black people are just starting to learn actually more about Juneteenth.
Right.
And one of the
Absolutely.
things that we are learning is, how do we celebrate? Before we could figure out how to celebrate Juneteenth, there's already ice cream flavors out, t-shirts. We don't even know what to do ourselves.
Right.
But the food traditions aren't new to us, specifically the red drinks. And so while things like red Kool-Aid, strawberry soda, these things are more common for us, one of the drinks that is also common is a drink made of hibiscus. Hibiscus is a plant that will turn foodstuffs red. Most commonly, I'm thinking about now, sorrel. So it's a drink, one of my favorites that you can find in Jamaican eateries. And so it's essentially a tea, very sweetened with some ginger, accented with ginger. That's really nice. And so this harkens back to food traditions in West Africa, where that red drink would have been, kind of like center stage in terms of like beverages.
And it is so intriguing. It's out of nowhere. There's no hibiscus tea in the aisle, and then suddenly it's everywhere. And it obviously having to do with now it's a federal. I think now it's a federal holiday.
I think it's, but everything is about what becomes more popularized. Also,
Right.
there
Commercial.
are other benefits besides this West African food tradition that comes along with hibiscus tea. But there's also these are plants that would have grown very easily in the Southeast because of it requires a lot of sun.
And okay, I can't go without talking about pound cake. And pound cake wasn't solely a Black thing, but it is definitely a Southern thing and is a Black thing.
So when it comes to food traditions like pound cake, while yes, this is not like originally a part of Black culinary lexicon because of the access to sugar and all of this, it is difficult. One of the things plantation society did, especially around that table or food, is it made difficult how to separate what's Black, what's white, because of traditions like Christmas. So a celebration, an antebellum Christmas, you would have had tables piled high of every kind of meat you can think of, every kind of vegetable you can think of, but also a pretty significant assortment of sweets. And so on the one hand, this is Christmas. And for enslaved folks, they're happy to see this relief of this culinary monotony of cornmeal and salt pork. So now it's like the more Black folks are embracing mainstream American holidays, and the more you have white folks saying, oh, this succotash is quite nice. It becomes difficult to tease out what's what, even though some things are kind of like decidedly Black, like anything with okra, many of the things with rice, greens with pickled and smoked ingredients, that is decidedly African. But that's one of the kind of interesting facts about plantation society.
Is it urban myth that ribs were something that no one ate and we took them?
I don't know that we could say, I wouldn't say ribs, because even if we think about other types of meat, beef, for example, I think a rib may be more sought after than like a chitterling or chitlin. You understand what I'm saying? So that's for sure.
Who are you? Who are you? Who are you really?
That's right. Who am I saying chitterling?
Yeah.
Right.
That's that Spelman. That's that Spelman College in you right now.
Right. And so for sure, I don't know about ribs, Karen, but for sure something like discards were seen as scraps, pig's feet.
Right. Yeah, from the rooter to the tutor.
That's
the tongue, the snout, the ears.
And the snout has significant resonance, I think, in St. Louis. I don't know that I can go many other places and go to like a Black-owned barbecue spot, and they would have on the menu what we know as a snoot.
Yeah. Come on, y'all. Snoots. It's a cheer. Suddenly it's a cheer.
Yeah.
It is such a joy to talk to you. And forgive me. Let us go with your sense of how something as basic, food is basic. We all eat it, right? As basic, but as crucial as food represents the resilience of the formerly enslaved.
I think that the relationship between Black food and Black joy and Black creativity and Black resilience has been inextricably linked since we left the shores of West Africa. So I think, foodstuffs, ships were provisioned with foodstuffs. So I'm talking yams, actual true yams, okra seeds, black-eyed pea seeds, all of that, And so then you add in the scraps. And what do you make out of this? This is the kitchen, or food creation is an unrestricted space where Black folks were able to create something out of nothing. And so it's a constant reminder that we became so good at creating something in a very terrible time in our history. We got so good at it that now, those foodstuffs are American foodstuffs. So you think about the cultural imprint that comes out of this painful history, an opportunity for us we were forced to create.
Right.
And so can you imagine, I don't think anybody in this room really could imagine New Orleans without gumbo.
Right.
Or Charleston without red rice. Chicago without Harold's wings and sauce. St. Louis without those ribs you were talking about.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Tandy, I'm just going to call you that from now on.
I love that nickname.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a joy. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Awesome. I knew it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. This has been such an enriching conversation. Thank you to each of our guests, to my amazing producer, this incredible marketing and production team who loaded everything from our office at 9 PBS in Grand Center and brought it all over here, including these incredible, which everybody loves them, our podcast chairs. We love them. Thank you to the Missouri Historical Society for allowing us to be here in this building, constructed from the profits of the 1904 World's Fair and opened to the public in 1913. We're in history, and we are indeed history. I do hope that this conversation has been an eye-opening and soul-stirring discussion as we continue the hard work of helping our neighbors and our friends recover from the devastating May 16th tornado. I am reminded again why 9 PBS exists: to serve the public good. And I'm reminded of our key values: community, trust, equity, and learning. We want the whole community to thrive. We are humbled by the trust you place in us. We believe that a focus on equity improves the entire region. And we know without a shadow of a doubt the power of learning leads to clarity, understanding, and elevation. And so as the nation prepares to recognize 250 years, we are proud to be able to offer to you a crucial part of that history, 160 years since the last slaves learned of their freedom. That crucial part of the nation's history is indeed a part of the maturation of this nation. That sets it, the nation, and us apart from any other country. So stay tuned for all the ways in which 9 PBS and, of course, the Missouri History Museum will invite you in and invite the community in to better our understanding, as genealogists would say, of who we are. Thank you for joining me for another incredible episode of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. Please share, please like, please become a subscriber, and please leave those incredible comments. We love to read them. Happy Juneteenth to you, also known as Happy Freedom Day. Be free, my friends. Thank you very much.
This in St. Louis with Carol Daniel is supported in part by Midwest Bank Center, Orvin and Latrice Kimbrough, the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation, and the St. Louis Development Corporation.